Today, I will show you how to convert this into this. Say goodbye to the traditional boring slicer and welcome to the new interactive and dynamic button slicer. In this tutorial, we'll master how to replace the traditional slicer with the new slicer, learning to customize them to different states, embedding images within the buttons, and even adding both values and labels with conditional formatting. Plus, we'll learn how to customize the button shape and size to perfectly suit your needs. Before we start, don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more epic BI and data science projects. Now, grab a cup of coffee, sit back and watch. In a previous project, we have created this dashboard where we monitor the sales across 5 different countries with 6 different products. And as you change the slicer, you can see the sales KPIs for each of the products. You can find a link in the description for the tutorial we created this dashboard with. Today, we want to replace this traditional slicer with a more dynamic and visually appealing slicer. As a start, let's just duplicate this page and let's remove this KPI and let's move the date slicer up here. We'll keep it. I don't want to delete it because it will affect the settings, but we can hide it from view, selection. Let's just hide this slicer, keep it as default, and we'll replace the country slicer with the button slicer filter or the new slicer. Let's click on it and we can expand it. Now, before we proceed further, we need to add images for the flags for each of the countries, and we need to show them inside each of the buttons. To do this, we'll go home, transform data. So we have this table showing the country and different periods and the sales. We want to create another table that shows only the countries. Let's just reference this table and select the L1 or the country column, right click, remove other columns, and from remove rows, from home, we remove duplicates. Let's rename it to country. Now we want to add a custom column stores the flags images for each of the countries in base64 format. And I have already downloaded the flags for those countries, and I tried to keep them the same size just to make sure all the images will appear in the buttons the same way. So we have those 5 flags. Now we are going to use an online tool to convert those flags images to base64 format. And for that, we're going to use base64.guru. I'll leave you a link in the description for this website. All you need to do here, just select each of the flags, starting with Canada, for example, and from the output format, make sure to select data URI and just click encode PNG to base64. So here we go, we have the code. Now you just copy it. Let's go back to our dashboard. Now add a column. We use conditional column. We name it flag, for example, and if the country equals Canada, and we're going to paste the base64 value. So this is the first flag. Let's see how it looks like. So we have the first base64 added. Now we need to repeat the same exact process for the other 4 countries. Here we go. I have added all the images. If you want to see the custom column we have added, so it's just multiple if statements based on the country name. We provide the corresponding base64 code. Let's rename this to country. Now we have the images table is ready. Close and apply. Now let's just make sure we have the relationship set correctly. So we need to create a relationship between the country and L1, which is the country of the sales hierarchy table. And that's it. Now we can start applying the setting to the button slicer. Now let's start by formatting this slicer. The first thing we need to do, we need to replace the field to take it from the country table. Let's just replace the L1 field. Now we have the country. It doesn't affect your data because we have already created the relationship. Now let's go to format your visual. Slicer setting, we'll make sure to keep it single select and force selection. We need always one to be selected. And from shape, let's leave it rounded rectangle. And for the layout, let's keep it as a single row, and we keep the rest as is. Also from general, we can hide the title, we don't need it, and we make sure from effect that the background is off if you like. Let's go back to format the visual further. We go to the values. So the nice thing about this new slicer, you can apply settings for different states. For the default, when you hover over it, when you press, and when it is selected. And we are going to apply different settings for different states. Let's start by the default state. We can change the font. I like to use this one. And we'll keep the size to 20, for example. And we'll put it in the middle. And the default state, we'll keep it transparent, like 70% transparent. Next, we're going to turn on the labels. So this allows us to add a field from our data to show below or above our value, and we can create any data. And for that, we want to see the total sales as a label for each of the countries. But here is a limitation. Whenever we're showing the sales as is, as data, it doesn't add units. Like it doesn't round it up to millions or to thousands. So we're forced to show the entire number. So we need to find a workaround for this. And for that, we're going to create a measure that rounds up this number for us and apply units as millions. So let's right click on the table, new measure. I'll just provide it. I have it ready. We'll name it sales label, and we're going to round it to 1 decimal place. So we define the sum of sales by 1 million, and then we add the units, which is million. Let's hit commit. Now all we need to do is to replace the original label with the measure we have created. Let's remove it first, and then we add the new label. Now you can see we have the label showing as expected. Let's format it a little bit. We use the same font size, we keep it at 30. We make it underlined, and the transparency, we set it again to 70. Now for the label color, we're going to use conditional formatting. Let's click on it, and we're going to apply gradient based on the sales. We search for the sales. We have here the total sales, and we're going to add a middle color. So we want the lowest value to show as red. Let's, for example, select red from here. We'll keep the center as amber and the highest value as green. This will allow us to have nice gradient value to show the highest value as green and the lowest as red. Let's apply it. You can see now we have Saudi Arabia has the highest, it's green, and lowest is UK, showing as red, and the rest is showing in between. Now let's update the value formatting for the hover state. So we want, whenever we hover over them, to get different formatting. For the value, we just keep everything as is. We switch the transparency to 0. So when you ever hover over it, you can see the value showing with 0 transparency. And we'll do the same for the labels. So now we can see, whenever we hover over it, we can see the value as is. For the selected, we're going to use the same format. We just remove the transparency and we remove the transparency also from the labels, and we apply the same conditional formatting we used for the default. Here we go, just click OK. So now whenever it's selected, we still see the same color coding, and we have now the values formatting is ready. Let's move on to the images now. Now let's expand the images, and we start by the default, and for the data we're going to use the flag field we have created. It contains the base64 code, and we keep the image fit as fill. So now you can see it shows nicely on top of each of the buttons. For the default state, we'll set the transparency to 70 and the saturation even to 50. That will give it a bit grayscale as a default. That will tell us it's not selected. And we'll keep the position as is and everything else the same. Now let's switch to the hover state. For the hover state, we're just going to play with the transparency. Let's change it to 50, for example, and the saturation to 100. So now whenever we hover over any of them, you can see it pops up. It feels more dynamic and interactive. And the final state is the selected. For the selected, we want to set the transparency to 0 and the saturation to 100. So whenever it's selected, it will show in full colors and without any transparency. That's visually easier to know that this button is selected. You can see it applies the same for all the countries. So we're done with the images formatting. The last thing we want to format is the buttons. Let's start by the default state. We keep the padding normal. The borders, we keep it the same. And for the fill, we can change it from white for the default one, for example, a darker color, a gray color, so it feels it's not selected. And one last thing I want to do here is turn on the shadow. This will make it look smaller, and we'll see in a minute why we're doing this. But first, let's switch to the hover state. We keep the fill as is, the padding, everything as is. And again, we turn on the shadows. So the button will not change as we hover over it, as in size. But finally, we do the selected state where we turn off the shadow. This will allow the button, whenever it's selected, to look bigger or to come to the front, while the others showing like in the back. That will give the slicer a nicer dynamic feel, as you can see. But let's also change the fill color. For the selected, we just make it white. That looks better now, but you can see the value, because it has a white value, it's not showing anymore. So let's make sure to change the selected color to black. So now we can see the country is showing, the country name is showing whenever you select. Now we have a nicely formatted slicer that it's more dynamic and interactive. You can apply it in your projects to make your dashboard more alive. One last thing, maybe we can turn off the shadows because we already have shadows for each of the buttons, so I prefer to keep it this way.